Good evening. Brian Keenan is flying home in an Irish government jet tonight after more than 4 years held hostage in Beirut. He was handed over to the Irish foreign minister in the Syrian capital Damascus earlier today. He looked pale and gaunt. He had some difficulty speaking because his captors had forced him to talk only in whispers, but he said he felt great. He said he'd met 3 of the other hostages, including the British journalist John McCarthy, whom he last saw on Thursday night.
The door of a Syrian government limousine opened, and then the first glimpse of a man who hadn't seen the outside world for 4 years. The glasses are to protect eyes which haven't experienced daylight in that time. The plastic bag contains the belongings he had with him when he was kidnapped. Inside the Syrian Foreign Ministry, the reunion with his sisters Elaine and Brenda. They'd flown from Dublin in an Irish government jet to be here. Both had worked tirelessly for his release, and this was the moment that they had waited for. The Irish Foreign Minister, Gerry Collins, had come with them. His offer of a free phone call on their return to Dublin to contact Brian Keenan's mother was greeted with some surprise. It still hadn't quite gelled that he was free.
A little old dear in Belfast. Your mum.
Your mum.
Your mum.
You haven't forgotten her, have you?
Just, so many women waiting.
He looked gaunt and tired, and at some stages found it difficult to speak. That's because the kidnappers rarely allow hostages to talk above a whisper. But although weakened by his ordeal, Brian Keenan then gave a remarkable performance. He was lucid and had not lost his sense of humour.
I feel a little bit like a cross between Humpty Dumpty and Rip Van Winkle. And so I hope that should answer that question. I would now take this opportunity to address a few words to people who I am concerned about at the moment. First of all, I would like to thank everyone responsible for securing my release. There are numerous people, and it would be beyond me to list them. At this moment, my thoughts are obviously with my family, and particularly my mother, back home in Belfast. I'm delighted, of course, to have my 2 pin-up girls with me. And if I could just say to Mum, get the pan on.
Then news of other hostages.
I last saw John McCarthy only 2 nights ago. He is well. His great sense of humour succeeded very early in driving me slightly insane. John's good-humoured mimicry was very much appreciated and brought in all of us who came in contact with him a real sense of the outside world.
He thanked the Syrian foreign minister and left. He may say more in time. He did reveal that he was held with 2 Americans, Thomas Sutherland and Terry Anderson, and said they were both in good health. But he did not mention Terry Waite, who is thought to be held by the same kidnap grouping, Islamic Jihad. This release is the result of hard work by the Iranians, who have said that they want all of the hostages to be freed by the end of the year. It augurs well for the Britons who are still held, Terry Waite, John McCarthy and Jackie Mann, especially since Tehran now wants to renew diplomatic relations with Britain. Michael Macmillan, BBC News in Damascus.
Brian Keenan's release has been welcomed by the British government. The Foreign Office is now looking at ways of reopening contacts with Iran and Syria. Neither country has diplomatic relations with Britain at the moment.
Britain hopes to build on Irish success in the freeing of Brian Keenan. The Foreign Office is looking at ways of re-establishing contact with both Iran and Syria and hopes this could help the British hostages.
Don't let me mislead you, I have no direct information of this, but it seems to me that the background atmosphere must be getting better rather than worse, and that must hope to contribute to progress.
The hostage takers do pay serious attention to the clear concern of governments about their nationals who are held hostage. So my message is to the government is redouble your efforts.
Campaigners for the release of journalist John McCarthy believe the Irish have shown what can be achieved by active diplomacy.
The British government have got to put the kind of energy and commitment into their handling of the hostage situation as the Irish government and every other government that has had hostages in the Middle East has done. Whatever the Irish government have done, it's worked.
Pictures of Brian Keenan being reunited with his sisters were greeted with delight by supporters of the John McCarthy campaign, and they hope this could herald further releases.
The United Nations Security Council, in its toughest resolution yet on the Gulf crisis, has authorised the use of force to implement economic sanctions against Iraq. The decision's been welcomed by the British government. Mrs. Thatcher said it was a considerable achievement to tighten the stranglehold on Iraq. Tonight, the UN Secretary-General, Mr. Perez de Cuellar, said he'd called for an urgent meeting with Iraq's foreign minister to try and find a peaceful solution to the crisis.
It took a little longer this time because the stakes are higher, but after 10 days and often nights of private discussions, the Security Council finally passed its 5th resolution against Iraq. There were some reservations. Cuba, predictably, because they find it difficult to back anything supported by the Americans, and Arab Yemen, whose adherence to UN sanctions against Iraq is questionable. But when the vote was taken, they merely abstained, whilst the other 13 voted in favour.
This is therefore an historic and significant decision. Under the circumstances, no lesser decision by the Security Council would have been appropriate.
So far, the Iraqis have totally ignored UN resolutions, but this one has teeth.
I must make it clear to the Council that such measures include such minimum use of force as may be necessary to achieve the purposes of this paragraph.
Sir Crispin says there's mounting evidence of breaches of the sanctions on a large scale. A string of tankers, he says, is now at sea with cargoes of Iraqi oil. To maintain a unified front, Britain and the United States eventually agreed to a resolution that does not specifically mention the word force. Instead, it speaks of using such means as necessary to stop the trade to and from Iraq. And as far as Britain and the United States are concerned, that gives them the go-ahead to use force if necessary. Keith Graves, BBC News at the United Nations in New York.
American troops continue to flood into Saudi Arabia. As many as 40,000 are already in place. Another 35,000 are on their way.
There is no question of these troops still pouring into Saudi Arabia wearing the United Nations helmet or acting under the United Nations flag. They are Americans under American command. But still they are encouraged by this United Nations mandate for the limited use of force, a further sign that the United States is not here on its own. It was a point made vividly for the Arabs of the Gulf by the Kuwaiti chairman of their Cooperation Council.
I will embrace the devil for the liberation of Kuwait. And if the devil wants a warmer embrace, I will not be reluctant to give him an extra one.
All is still quiet on the northern front, the likeliest battlefield if United Nations resolutions fail. The flood of Kuwaiti refugees of 2 weeks ago has thinned to a trickle, but these are lucky to escape with their lives. The Iraqis took everything else.
It's very difficult to cross, you know. We give them our water, our juice, and there's whichever car they take it, you know.
The troops right up at the border are Saudi Arabian on one side and Iraqi in the oasis on the other. They're said to be second or third echelon formations, the elite Republican Guard having retreated further north to defensive positions which it seems they're going to need. Martin Bell, BBC News, Saudi Arabia.
Britain has protested tonight to the ambassador of the Arab state of Yemen about his country's expulsion of a senior British diplomat. Doug Gordon, the Consul General in Aden, is accused of activities incompatible with his diplomatic status, the term normally used for spying. The Foreign Office says he was monitoring Iraqi shipping suspected of breaking international sanctions.
Aden Harbour is one of the places where Britain believes the embargo against Iraq is being breached. The Consul General there had been watching out for suspicious tankers, but the Foreign Office deny that amounted to spying. One report, though, says the diplomat, Doug Gordon, has also been accused of taking pictures of a refinery and military installations. A short time ago, the Yemeni ambassador in London was summoned to the Foreign Office to hear a vigorous protest about the expulsion order. Tonight, the government is also alarmed by the rounding up in Kuwait of 4 more British citizens, one of them a heavily pregnant woman due to give birth in 3 weeks' time. She was driving back from a clinic when she was stopped at a roadblock by Iraqi troops and taken to a hotel in the city. Downing Street say the woman's detention is totally contemptible. As Iraqi television showed these pictures of troops on parade in Baghdad, there was an ominous warning that civilians caught sheltering foreigners will face the death penalty. It'll be considered the same as espionage. There's now virtually nothing the British embassy in Kuwait can do to help its citizens. It's under siege. Though the tanks which had encircled it have now withdrawn, troops with machine guns and mortars are still outside. They've cut off the power supply. Iraq says the 4 staff inside lost their diplomatic immunity at a minute past midnight. But it says it won't use force to get them out.
The Austrian President Kurt Waldheim has managed to get about 100 Austrian hostages released from Iraq. He flew with them to Jordan tonight after securing their release during a meeting with President Saddam Hussein.
This was the first time in recent days that President Saddam Hussein had answered questions in public, and he chose the group of Austrian journalists who'd flown to Baghdad with President Waldheim to speak to. He seemed relaxed and calm, though he attacked the decision by the United Nations Security Council, which will permit force to be used to back up sanctions against Iraq. In particular, President Saddam Hussein must be angry with the Soviet Union, since Mr. Gorbachev brushed aside his request for a respite of a few days to answer a private message from Moscow. President Saddam Hussein, in his news conference, attacked the United States for sending its troops to Saudi Arabia, accusing the Americans of occupying the holiest places of Islam.
It is the duty of the Americans now to bear in mind that they should resort to a political solution and not to force, and that they should forget this tendency that they have, that they can get everything they want.
Beside the Iraqi president sat the smiling figure of Dr. Kurt Waldheim, rarely seen abroad until recently. He appears to have obtained the release of Austrian citizens from Iraq by his intervention here, though probably nothing much more. President Saddam Hussein was clearly in no mood to compromise over the occupation of Kuwait.
I shall say that whoever collides with Iraq will find in front of him columns of dead bodies which may have a beginning but may not have an end.
To add to some of the other extraordinary pictures which Iraqi television has been putting out during this crisis, it showed tonight the wedding of 2 British people in Baghdad, which seems to have taken place last Thursday. The couple met apparently in Kuwait, where they were living. And this, in the presence of other British prisoners held now in Iraq, was the result. John Simpson, BBC News, Baghdad.
The first British hostage released by Iraq, the 15-year-old schoolboy Alan Barnett, has been reunited with his family. He's back home in Scotland tonight.
Alan Barnett was reunited with his family after being held by the Iraqis in an army flat in Baghdad. He was among a group of British hostages included in a television broadcast with the Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. Alan says his release came as a complete surprise.
He was talking to us, and then a friend of mine's mother, Mrs. Morton, she told the president that I was unaccompanied. I was 15 years old, and that I was counted as a minor here. And so the translator told the president this, and he asked me if I wanted to leave, and I said yes. So
Alan said he'd been well looked after in Iraq. He added that the Britons he left behind were generally in good spirits, although resigned to the possibility of a long wait.
And now, with news of the 3rd test and the opening day of the football season, here's Rob Bonnet.
It's been a bad day for England in the 3rd test against India at the Oval, in particular for the former captain David Gower. His place on the winter tour to Australia is still in doubt after another failure in England's 293 for 7th. They need 114 runs to avoid the follow-on.
On a hot, sultry morning with a huge Indian total confronting them, it was always going to be a sticky day for England, though night watchman Williams approached it with the freshness of a breeze. and with such comfort that bigger batting reputations settled back to relax. Then a sharp awakening. Williams LBW to Prabhakar for 38. The jolts, though, seemed barely to have awoken Gower. A lazy shot, a first test wicket for Wasan, and Gower's ideal opportunity to confirm a place on the Winter's Ashes tour had gone. Not long afterwards, so too had Morris's. Out for 7, and with Lamb soon to follow for the same score, the Indians were bang on top, whichever way you looked at it. The captain, bristling with determination, resolved to grind his way out of trouble. The fluent stroke play of his run-soaked summer now an utter irrelevance. In harness with the more aggressive Smith, 92 were added, but with 176 still needed to avoid the follow-on, disaster was to strike twice in 2 overs. First, Shastri winkled out Smith for 57. Then Hirwani, obtaining ominous spin, finally tempted Gooch. Caught for 85, and England in desperate trouble. But not for the first time, Russell then arrived to sustain flagging English hopes. He and Hemmings have defiantly added 60, but England still have a long way to go.
In the county championships, second-place Middlesex need to beat Yorkshire at Headingley to go back to the top of the table ahead of Essex. Mike Rosebery made 80 in Middlesex's second innings as they set Yorkshire a target of 331, and Tim Curtis hit a career-best 197 not out as Worcestershire took control of their match with third-placed Warwickshire. Several members of England's World Cup squad made their mark on the opening day of the new Football League season. So did the country's biggest and best-known clubs. Gary Lineker of Tottenham scored Division 1's first goal of the season in their game against Manchester City. Later, he added another, with Paul Gascoigne getting a third as Spurs made a winning start. A John Barnes goal put Liverpool on their way to a victory at Sheffield United, and Neil Webb scored Manchester United's second goal in their win against Coventry City. Arsenal also won, Paul Merson scoring their first in the victory at Wimbledon, and a goal from Leeds' Imre Varadi proved decisive in their success at Everton. In Scotland, Rangers started well in their attempt on a third successive Premier Division championship. They beat Dunfermline 3-1. Mark Hateley, Rangers' £500,000 signing from Monaco, was making his league debut and made an impact in the 10th minute with his team's first goal. Dunfermline equalised shortly afterwards, but later Johnston and Walters sealed the game for Rangers.
And the main news again. The United Nations have voted to allow force to be used to back up the sanctions against Iraq. The Iraqi government says anybody caught sheltering foreigners will be executed. And the Belfast hostage Brian Keenan is flying home tonight. Before he left the Middle East, where he'd been held captive for 4 years, he talked about his plans for the future.
I have had, as you know, a long time to think about what am I going to do when I get out of here. And I thought, and I thought, and I thought, and I worked it all out meticulously. So maybe it will help your reports if I tell you I'm going to visit all the countries in the world, eat all the food in the world, drink all the drink in the world, make love, I hope, to all the women in the world. And maybe I'll get a good night's sleep at the end of it. Well done. Thank you. Thank you.
Nothing wrong with his appetite. We hope to bring you a special news report on Brian Keenan's homecoming at the end of the film after this news. But for now, from the newsroom, good night.
Good evening. Well, many parts of the country are going to stay dry through this evening and tonight, but that certainly can't be said for parts of the southeast, where earlier on we did have quite an intense area of thundery rain that's moved only very slowly southwestwards. In fact, it's continuing to just push its way northwards up through Lincolnshire, and 1 or 2 showers being set off on the eastern side of the Pennines too. Now they're going to hang around for quite some time through the evening and the night. Out in the west it's not too bad. There are some breaks in the cloud, in fact. But what will happen as we go through the night is the low cloud will begin to push back in again. It'll turn generally misty across much of the country, and as the last of those thunderstorms die out, it could even turn quite foggy in patches on what will be a very warm and sticky night. Well, here's tomorrow's weather map. We'll have this weak weather front coming in across the country, but it's dying out really. Could just set off the odd shower anywhere from Scotland down through the west, but there the showers will be few and far between. And after a rather dark, rather grey start, the sun will come out in the south, but later on, late afternoon, early evening as today, will also help to spark off those thunderstorms and heavy showers again, particularly in the south and southeast, on what will be a very hot day once more in the south, but fresher in the far northwest. That's it from me.
Autumn on BBC One brings a brand new look for Saturday night with...
Shocks and surprises! A shock for DJ Bruno Brooks when he gets the Gotcha Oscar, and nice surprises when the Gift Busters call in Aberdeen. The kids are outrageous. Him? You'll have to watch.
Then at 7:20, at long last, the return of the Maestro. At 7:50, young Tristan's back.
Mr. Farnan asked me to call Mrs. Harriet, and Mr. Tristan Farnan.
Mr. Farnan's arrived at your farm already, has he, Mr. Biggins?
Oh, hi, Mrs. Harriet. Mr. Farnan's with me cow now.
Then economic words from Alf.
There is Mr. Alfred Garnett's money. And there is Mr. Artie Laskin's money. That's for them, for when they need it.
What about my money?
All right, there's Mrs. Hollenbury's money.
You haven't given me as much as you.
Would you shut up?
A brand new look to Saturday night, this autumn on BBC One.
At midnight tonight, Frankie Howard will be setting a frantic pace in the film whose title says it all, Up the Chastity Belt. Now, though, suspense with Donald Sutherland and Kate Nelligan in the spy thriller set in wartime Britain, Eye of the Needle.
This is Bruce Davids from London. Around me, the city is in flames from the German bombs dropped last night by Hitler's Luftwaffe. The countless dead are being dug from the rubble. And on the coast of France, the German armies wait for this country to surrender. But English troops are fighting back. And in the skies, the young men of the Royal Air Force are struggling against the Nazi forces which only a year ago invaded Poland, swept through France, and left this country standing alone in a conflict which, if lost, could destroy the free world.
Very good, Sergeant Major. Move the men in.
All right.
Mind your backs, gangway. Mind your backs.
I found the 4 extra carriages you need.
Good.
You'll have your 1,000 men unfed, but they'll be there.
I'd rather be with them than in this madhouse.
Finland appeals to you, does it? Is it the country or the ladies?
Just a brief surge of patriotism. You coming for a drink?
Thanks, no. Perhaps tomorrow. Hello?
See you in the morning.
Yes. 3 that I can see from here. Cheers.